Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to be doing my top 10 favorite manhwa that follow mages. Just a little asterisk, I did not include necromancy in this magic list just because they have their own list already. With that, let's jump right into the video. Number 10. Archmage Transcending through Regression is a manhwa that came out not that long ago that only has about 20 chapters out at the time of recording this video. It isn't the most unique story out there, following a main character that faces off against the great evil of his time and faces impending doom and forces himself to turn back the clock. That being said, it does do some things I find a little interesting. For one, the reason the main character sees his failure is that he wasn't the main character of the bigger story. He was following the hero, a hero that failed to live up to the promise that he had. So he chooses to go back in time, not just to save the day and defeat the big bad evil, but also to right the wrongs and the bad decisions that he made along the way. Again, not the most original concept. That being said, I really like these stories of these kid prodigies that are these reincarnations of previous superhero type characters going through the paces of either getting revenge or getting even, or just making the lives of their family members, friends, and allies better and stronger because of the knowledge they have. So far, this one has been doing it well, though I do feel that the art style is not particularly impressive, and the storyline beats so far have been kind of predictable to a certain extent. That being said, I still enjoy it, I definitely recommend it, and that's why it's on this list. Number 9. City of Dead Sorcerer is not your typical manhwa, and that's why it's on this list. I don't think it's perfection, I think it has a lot of flaws, including its art style, but it does some things really differently that I absolutely respect it for. What it follows is a world where magic is technological to a certain extent. There's this substance that exists within the world that we just discovered, and we've created tech to be able to use it and leverage it and to create these magic spells for the everyday user to use. That being said, this is a futuristic world. It's a bit of a cyberpunk type vibe, and it's not one I see a lot in manhwa, particularly not in magic manhwa. So I really just enjoyed right away the setting is different. The main character is a person with special abilities. He's able to use magic outside of the confines of the typical ways that people use them. There's a really cool reference early on in the story to brands and how now branding of tech is kind of interesting. So it's Samsung technically that developed this piece of technology to harness the power of this particle, and that concept kind of grabbed me. I kind of found it interesting. They don't do much with it, to be perfectly honest, but I kind of like the concept of where they went to. The story does meander. It goes in some interesting and weird places. There's this really interesting dynamic that goes on between the main character that's kind of an anti-hero and a detective, which I think it builds a good dynamic that's very commonly used in South Korean police dramas in particular, but I think they do it really well in this series, even though it has some story flaws and some character flaws along the way. I still think you should check it out. Number 8. Magician is a story that's often slept on. It's a couple years old now. Its art style is definitely not for everyone. I think it's beautiful in its art style, but it's definitely a different game than what you're used to if you're used to the typical soul leveling, trash hero type art styles. But it's story about magic. It's story about two younger kids following this crazy strong magician is one that brought me into manhwa. It's one of my first manhwa. It's a finished one, and it's one I think you should check out. It follows a magician that, I won't break because there's some plot twists later on. However, these two kids encounter this great magician that is seen as basically a disaster and seen as a threat to humanity in a way, and they end up following him around as he travels through the world trying to find this great enemy that he's looking for, and there's twists related to that. The magic is really cool. The art style has a really unique vibe, and I really like the character interactions that they build throughout the story. There's some tragedy involved in those different things, and there's definitely some twists later on that satisfied me deeply for the story, and I think it ends in a satisfying way. So if you don't know about this one, do check it out and give it a chance. Number 7. Return of the Eighth Circle Mages follow a mage that gets betrayed by his king because he's seen as too powerful and a threat to the monarchy. When he's about to die, he uses an item to send himself back in time, and in this second life that he lives, he seeks to position himself to be against that person that betrayed him, which, I mean, makes a lot of sense. Along the way, obviously, help a mother that would have died earlier, and other members of his family that would have ended up with different scenarios happening to them, or more like adjoining friends and stuff like that to make their lives a bit better. He's positioned himself in interesting ways with a different royal candidate, and it creates a little bit of a political scheming that goes on in the story. Actually, I think this is where the story shines. The magic of this story it's good, it's impressive, but it's also not that important, strangely enough. This is more about the political positioning of the main character, because that's where the plot lies. It's him trying to get revenge on this previous person, but in very roundabout ways. He doesn't want to just kill the person. He wants to make sure that they fail at what they're trying to achieve. And other people that are also behind this bigger conspiracy are discovered along the way, and he has to also get even with them. That being said, the main character is a little disconnected. He's not very passionate. He's not full of fire and fury. He's a very stoic, very calm, very controlled person, and I feel like the story at times can be a little meh because of it. I think the visuals are on point, the magic is still very good, and I like this plot line of political maneuvering that's going on, but I definitely don't think it deserves to be higher up on this list because of some of the things I just mentioned. Number 6. I Am the Sorcerer King is a lot of fun. It's a finished manhwa, which is kind of a rare thing in the world of manhwa. Follows a main character that transmigrates through to a different world and is basically reborn into a different body, or more like becomes aware that he's the resurrected body. Kind of a weird thing. What's really cool about this story is the mix of magic and technology. The use of things like missiles in high-level spells. Intergalactic space travel. It's just got some weird stuff going on. I will say this. A lot of fun. An art style that's really unique. Following a main character that's basically trying to become as strong as possible, and actually a main character that uses that strength in some of the ways you might imagine someone would on Earth. Yeah, he's a nation-level threat, and countries have to deal with him as such, either by trying to fight against him or trying to make alliances, negotiations, and things like that. With these gates that are showing up everywhere on Earth, he has to use his magic to basically stop these gates from opening and fight those that are trying to invade the Earth or from other, basically other universes and other parallel worlds. What I will say about this series, though, is that its ending for me was a huge disappointment. I still think the road to the story is absolutely worth reading. Just the story's ending is going to feel like, well, wait, there's no more chapters? What's going on? It is a finale. It definitely, if you look at it, there are all the things you need to make it an ending. However, for me, it was wholly unsatisfying. Number 5. Max Level Hero Has Returned is one that I've had a love-hate relationship with. I don't like characters that are too OP, that just don't give you that much enjoyment of seeing them struggle against the enemy, and Max Level Hero Has Returned is definitely a story like that. The main character can do everything, can beat anyone, and struggles very rarely in the storyline, and that is not the most engaging thing in the world to me. What I will say, and I have to give it some props for, is where they go with the story is interesting. It follows a main character that basically was put into a coma by a family member. He ends up going to, I almost don't remember this, he gets trained by a bunch of, I'll call them gods, but let's call them just the heroes of different things. Either the best healthcare person in the world, the strongest swordsman, the amazing mage, the poison master, all these different heroes. And basically he comes back to his body after basically having been on the brink of death with all these skill sets. And the first thing he does as a royal is to get even with the one that put him in the hospital, and as well as set himself up to be basically an antagonist to the family that put him in that situation. But that is so irrelevant to the bigger story. The story is more about his adventures and the things he does to help those around him, put himself in weird situations. He's just likes playing around with some scenarios as well. And the story as a whole is kind of fun to read. I can't deny it. But you need to just accept that the main character has every skill that exists. Think of any online fight. If ever you've done this, if you've been on an online forum where you're play fighting in a Magic tournament and everyone keeps being like, there's no rules, you come up with a new spell every single time you want, and like, my spell is more powerful than yours, my spell is more... It's kind of like that, because he could pull out stuff at any moment that no one can expect and get him out of any situation he wants. You can say that about a bunch of characters, though. Number 4. Tower of God is one of the OG big manhwa. If you were going to have a big 3 in the manhwa world, Tower of God would probably be one of them. It has the most sales, or one of the most sales out there, as well as being one that's lasted the longest. I started reading this thing, my God, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. And I've read it up till now, and I have to say it is one of the most consistent manhwa out there with some of the best character development you can see. And also one of the rare ones that can compare to some of the long-running manga out there. Let me get more into detail with this now. It follows a main character by the name of Bon that starts out as this naive protagonist. And to a certain extent, I think he always maintains that naivete a little bit along the way. But he starts off and goes on this quest to climb this tower because he's following after a girl, which is never the best reason to go on a quest, but it is what it is. He creates some alliances and some allies along the way, some friends, some people that you're a little unsure if they're going to be friends or actually enemies later on. But he builds this ensemble cast of people that generally trust him until there's the situations that happen that force a time jump and a big change to his personality, which I thank the Lord, because for me, after that point, it becomes much more watchable. Following his shift into this new character, this new powerhouse that he is, he changes his approach and what he's trying to do, and the story becomes much more engaging. I have a problem with these types of stories most of the time. I'm a person that only likes following one character, because I think looking at the world through one character gives you a better perspective on one thin storyline point. This storyline follows a lot of different ensemble characters. You'll have whole chapters that just follow one of the many groups that are around our main protagonist in the similar way that One Piece does it. And that's why I always compare it a little bit to One Piece in regards to there's a lot of world building, there's a lot of characters with their own motivations, unique power sets. I don't think to the same sense and the same level as One Piece does it, but I definitely think it's one that is probably the closest in the manhwa world in regards to building that big cast of characters that you find mostly interesting and that you're interested in following around. That being said, I normally hate those types of stories. I've gotten more into One Piece recently, but generally I'm not a big fan of following a lot of characters. I care about Luffy, I care about Bam, and that's the only character I care about. But I have to say, generally, Tower of God does a good job at making these characters compelling. I think the one flaw that the story has is the games are both really interesting. Each floor has its games as you climb, and to be able to get to the next floor, you need to succeed in the game, or else you can either die or be sent down or be stuck on that floor, depending on the situation. And sometimes the games are basically just there to get in the way of what you want to see happening. And I know it's a great plot device, it works really well, but having the characters that you're like, oh, they're finally going to fight, it's going to be this amazing kick-ass fight, and you have this stupid game that's happening at the same time. It reminded me of just having like the flashbacks in the Naruto fights with Sasuke, and just having these huge flashbacks to like 10 years ago, and you're just like, are you kidding me right now? Obviously this happened in the anime, not in the manga, but like, I'm like, really? Really, right now? I don't need to see this right now. I just want to see the fight. And when the fights do happen, they're insane. The art style does this crazy jump up in quality later in the story. You have to get through a lot of chapters before you get through it. There is a bit of a curve in regards to the quality of that art, but I still think it's good from the beginning, and it's definitely worth checking out. Not to mention the cool weapons that are in this story as well. they all make it a really good one that you should be checking out and deserves to be at the top of most lists out there. Number 3. Returner's Magic Should Be Special is a manhwa that I discovered a while back and fortunately has a fair bit of chapters to read. It follows a character by the name of Désir Armand, who is sent back in time, a second chance to live his life after basically perishing to the great dragon of his time. This all happens in chapter 1. This is not a big spoiler. What I really like about Returner's Magic Should Be Special is the strength of the ensemble cast. Manhwa has not been great in general about building strong teams. I think manga is far better at that than manhwa ever has been, with the rare exception of a couple of series, including one that's on this list. But in the larger case, you don't care about the other characters that much, and they're not that important to the success of the story. It's mostly just the main character's strength that will be the big impact in the end. And in this one, his return back in time not only is for him to basically rebuild the party that he had, but also help people rise up in a world that is very cruel and judgmental to those that aren't born with the highest social ranking of royalty. And this fight of the peasant against the aristocracy is something that I really enjoy in stories, particularly in the way that this one's done, because there's a lot of these little moments where the main character and his circle are able to show off what they can do, and all of this is setting up the big battles that are coming against villains. And even though he's gone back in time and he knows what's going to happen, his actions have already changed the turning of time, so he's not as well equipped as he thought he would be in his great fight against the dragon. That being said, this one just came back off of its season break, so if you're jumping into it now, it's a good time, and you're going to be getting some chapters week to week to read. So definitely check it out. Its art style is also phenomenal. Number 2. Great Mage Returns After 4,000 Years remains a manhwa that I both respect and love reading. It follows the main character that was locked away for 4,000 years in his fight against the demigods in a way of permanent torture and pain until he finds a way to inhabit the body of a boy that was trying to end his own life. And in doing so, he begins his adventure once more to defeat the demigods that are basically these godlike beings that are controlling the fate of humanity. I love the basis of this storyline. I think the art style is on point. I think the magic spells are really cool. And I think that the way that our main character, Lucas Trauman, and the other name that he takes on, Frey Blake, act and build out this alliance of people around him is super interesting and keeps me engaged continuously. It's definitely had some weaker arcs along the way, but I don't think it had a single arc that is so weak that it was droppable. And the arc that finished a little while ago was fantastic. And this current arc is also very interesting because now they're hunting down, and that's always really interesting. Also, it's one of those manhwa where I see the end game. A lot of manhwas feel like it's not very clear where they're going to go in the long term. But this is kind of really straightforward, or at least it seems straightforward onto who they need to defeat to finish the storyline. And that kind of gives me a little bit of hope that they're not going to turn this into a series that goes too long and loses the steam at the end of it. Number 1. Last but not least, we have The Beginning After the End. The Beginning After the End follows Arthur Lowen, a reincarnation of a previously lived king that comes into this world as a baby and goes through his development years learning magic and this new system that exists in this world. The story, the success that is The Beginning After the End, is kind of unique. It's one that a lot of people have gotten around. It's a very loved series. But what makes it so good is just Arthur is an adult in a boy's body, which sounds like a terrible thing to say, but he actually acts like it. Yes, all these stories are kind of written with an adult doing the design, so often the dialogue in all these manhwa, all these manga is like way more developed than it should be for someone the age of the character. But for once, a character acts and reflects on his previous life in a way that makes sense for the character. There is romance that's introduced into the story, and the character reacts in a way of like, this is kind of weird and creepy. I shouldn't be okay with this because I'm not a 15-year-old boy. I'm a 30-year-old man in this body, inhabiting this body. And that is just a very different dynamic. And to have the character address it and also act in accordance to it makes so much sense. And there's a good amount of reflection going on. I think the only place it stumbles at all is I feel like the story tries to tell you rather than showing you sometimes, particularly in the Academy arc, where they're really trying to explain how magic works in the system. It's something you'll do in these little like blurbs at the top of a manga or a manhwa, or a written thing, except in this case they really went through the long form written words of like, this is how the magic system works, as professors try to teach it to students, and it really made those chapters drag on far more than they should have. The different conflicts in the series only come up mostly later. Right now we're deep into the different conflicts of the series. We're going through a training arc currently. But if you look back long before, there weren't that many antagonists, but rather just bumps in the road of the adventure of the main character. And that made it seem like a much more long-form epic adventure without a clear ending. And I don't know why normally I wouldn't be that excited about that, but I think the beginning after the end did it better than any other series out there. If you like this type of content, guys, please do like and subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it. And if there's anything you'd like to see me do on this channel, please leave a comment down below on what you think that should be. I'm still trying to build out this channel to see what it should become and where I should go with it, but your advice would be deeply appreciated. With that, thank you so much for watching today. Have a great day.